Okay, here's some more of the equations. Now these are a little bit more complicated, and this is a little bit more of a blend of algebra and trigonometry. And again, we have sine squared of x equals 3 minus 2 sine of x on the interval 0 to 2 pi. And number 6, I don't know if I forgot to write that down, but it was also the same interval 0 to 2 pi. That was our restricted domain. And what we've got here looks like a quadratic. This looks like x squared, x, and a number, so it looks like we write this as a quadratic. So let's group everything on the left and see what we have. So we have the sine squared of x. And if I add 2 sine of x to both sides, I get plus 2 sine of x. And if I subtract 3 from both sides, negative 3 equals 0. Looks like a quadratic. This would be very similar to x squared plus 2x minus 3 equals 0. And I could factor that and solve it. It's the same thing, but only it's in terms of sine. So I can rewrite this like the product of two binomials. It's a trinomial. And the way I get sine squared would be sine of x and sine of x. And I need to get a 3 here. So the way I can get 3 would be by 1 times 3. Now it's a simple trinomial, so it's easy to figure this out. The signs are different. Sine of the larger is positive, so I usually put my larger there. It doesn't always have to go like that. And then I need two numbers that multiply to give 3 and differ by 2, so that would just be 3 and 1. And of course you always check it. That's going to be sine squared, that's going to be negative 3. Then my outside and inside, that'd be 3 minus 1 is 2, so it checks out, positive 2. So I got two possibilities. I set each of these equal to 0, so sine of x plus 3 equals 0. This is kind of like number 1 we did way back at the beginning of these, up at the top. And if I solve that for sine of x, I get the sine of x equals negative 3. Or I've got the sine of x minus 1 equals 0. So sine of x equals 1. Now the thing is, with this amplitude of 1, the sine of x is always going to be between plus 1 and minus 1. Always fluctuate between plus 1 and minus 1 with an amplitude of 1, which this has, so it can't be 3. It can never be negative 3, so no solution here. And when is the sine of x equal to 1? Well, the sine of x equals 1. At pi over 2. So x equals pi over 2. That's your one solution. Oops. Pi over 2, pardon me. Okay. And then this next one is looks like it's another quadratic. We just have a coefficient of the squared term. So again, I recognize this as something like 2x squared, x, and 1. So I'll try to group everything. So I've got 2 cosine squared of x plus the cosine of x minus 1 equals 0. And again, it's just like this equation, 2x squared plus x minus 1 equals 0, which we could factor. It's not a simple trinomial, but it's one of the easier general trinomials. So I'll write it as a product of two binomials. And that's the only way I can multiply and get 2 cosine squared of x. Now the only way I can get 1, the only way I can get 1 is by 1 times 1. So we just have to kind of play with the signs. We know the sine of the large is going to be, well, we know that the inside and outside terms will combine to be positive 1. So the way I can get a positive with different signs, because this tells me my signs are going to be different, is to make this positive. So I get 2 times 1 is 2. Make this negative minus 1. And you always check it. 2 cosine squared, negative 1. And then this is going to be positive 2 minus 1 is positive 1. So again, we set each of those equal to 0. Equals 0, and so 2 cosine of x equals 1, so the cosine of x equals 1 over 2. And the cosine of x equals negative 1. All right, this is positive, so like before, we've got a couple quadrants. Now the cosine equals 1 over 2 at pi over 3. So x equals pi over 3. I'm positive, and the cosine is positive also in the fourth quadrant. All students take calculus in the fourth quadrant. So that would be, let's see, pi over 3. I've got 2 pi over 3, 4 pi over 3, 5 pi over 3. And the cosine is negative 1. And again, you can look at your unit circle. Now this is 1, 0. And this is negative 1, 0. That's cosine sine. It's negative 1 at pi. It's 180. So x equals pi. So there's your solutions. 1, 2, 3. Okay?